Hi everyone, it's Jerry. Let's have a look at a game from round 4 of the Altibox Norway Chess Tournament 2020. On the white end, Magnus Carlsen, and he's paired against Fabiano Caruana. So world number 1 versus 2. Whenever they're paired, always interesting to see how it plays out, whether decisive or drawn. So let's hop right in, see how this one went. Carlsen opens with Namaste. He's been going with this greeting for a few rounds now. There's a no handshake rule for this tournament. So instead, it's been, for Carlsen at least, an I bow to you greeting. I'd say a good substitute for a handshake. Anyhow, move 1 by Carlsen, d4. Opening-wise, we have Nimzo-Indian Defense. Queen c2 denotes the classical variation. White has no interest in allowing doubled c-pawns. White's prepared to recapture with the queen. We have this on board. An early imbalance, knight for bishop. Black playing in the center, white activating the unopposed dark square bishop, pinning the knight. Black gives up their strong central pawn, taking away from the center. If you're going to do this, there ought to be good justification for it. What is it? Let's see. b6. With b6, Black's prepared to deploy the queen bishop on an atypical diagonal, a6 to f1. At the end of the day, what does this mean? It means, for Black, that white will go uncastled. Black will eventually be capturing on f1. Okay, move 9, rook d1. Is there anything that grabs your attention about this current position? For me, it's the king side. Currently, well, they've been spectators so far. All right, this last move by white does have its points. It discourages Black from striking at white's strongest pawn. c5 can be met with the capture, and the rook would be unleashed to hit the queen. All right. Sure enough, the bishop on the atypical diagonal. Black questions the bishop while also producing a flight square. The pin is maintained. Fabi now offers a queen exchange. If white accepts the queen exchange, Black conveniently recaptures, secures f6, and is now prepared to strike with c5 next. White doesn't want to help Black in that way, so ducks the queen exchange, and now hints at maybe damaging the king side while also maintaining the queens on board. If you're going to have a damaged king side, in this case, if Black is going to have a damaged king side, you don't want to have the queens on board. You don't want to have a drafty king and the queen still be on. So Black still pursues this queen exchange, queen c6. It's accepted at this moment. You'll notice it's accepted at a moment where the knight is recapturing on c6, the knight is not defended, and the c-pawn is obstructed. Now, something I quickly looked at is, well, suppose white tries to be a pest somehow. And by pest, I mean maintain the queens with queen to b1. With the idea to, maybe damage the structure like this. Well, that's not working because Black is now, with the queen not on d7, able to play knight d7, secure f6, connect rooks. Huge lead in development for Black. Completely underdeveloped for white. Black just moments away from striking at white's center. Not a good idea at all for white. So, queen exchange it is. We enter an ending. Bishop takes knight grabbed my attention a little bit because it is not as if, oh, I damage your king side, you have some weaknesses there now, and I'm going to take advantage of them. I don't believe that that is the case. I believe it has more to do with I'm not so sure how effective my dark square bishop will be in this environment. I think maybe this knight, when if given a chance to move to maybe d5 or e4, it can be a much more effective piece than the dark square bishop. An idea to put pressure on c7, I think, is something that would be short-lived. This pawn is soon to move to c5. We're going to have the knights jumping around maybe on the queen side. c4 is a very sensitive point in white's camp. Okay. In this game, we do have bishop takes knight. Simplifying quite a bit. 2 rooks apiece. A tricky knight for each. It's not fun. You have to babysit b2, though, for a little bit. c5. So this is where there can be some structural changes. White in this position plays king to e2. I questioned why not take here and say, aha, I have split your queenside pawns. The issue with this is that b2 will soon be struck at. Black will quickly coordinate with their best piece, rook b8. You know, if I'm to play out a couple moves, king e2, rook b8, what are we doing to defend b2? You move the pawn, you drop the a pawn. You move b, you drop a. White would have to go for counterattacking moves. And we can have some variation like this, where how to assess it. It's completely equal. I actually prefer black, though. I feel that there's a better chance for maybe black to coordinate with their rook and knight than these two. Maybe somehow getting to e4 and b2. King is a little bit more exposed than the black king. Could see possibly coordination on f2 for the black pieces. If we consider the corresponding f7 square, not so clear how the rook and knight easily coordinate there. Anyhow, structural changes. Capture on c5, yay or nay? It's nay at this point. King e2. Rook c8, rook c1. This is another moment where there can be a structural change. Black drops the knight back, and now that the knight has been driven back, white goes for this breaking up of black's queenside pawns. So there's not as much pressure in this case over b2 on the b2 square. So this is another moment I questioned, because why did Fabi not capture on d4? I'm not sure. I can't quite put my finger on this one. Maybe it's related to, he did not want to see the knight arrive on this strong post on d4. It's a strong post for sure, but at least the queenside structure is rock solid for black. The knight can fall back, the king can improve to e7, and it's difficult for me to see how either side makes substantial progress in this position. Maybe an idea is something like this, anchoring a knight into c6. Maybe that's something. I'm not quite sure. White is a tiny bit better, having a slightly better knight position, and maybe also because of this, the king also has a pretty good square on d3. Again, just sharing some thoughts. I'm not 100% sure. These are the kind of things I do when trying to prepare for this video, so just some thoughts there. At the end of the day, black does not want to see the knight on d4. Also, I mean, another train of thought is, okay, yeah, I know the pawns are split, but I'm still going to have some counter pressure on your queen side now that my pawns are split. So it's not just about d4, denying the knight the d4 square, but yeah, some play on the b file will ensue. Okay, as it stands right now, white has a target now, the c5 pawn. So some pressure is directed there. It's a little, it's kind of interesting, certain moves right here for me. You'll notice as soon as that knight went to d4, now this is where black thinks maybe a bit more about playing c4, right? as soon as the knight is no longer a move away from getting to that d4 square, now black is like, okay, I'll go c4. Now you can at least quickly get to that d4 square. But anyhow, another point behind c4, black doesn't want to see that knight take up maybe a strong post on the c4 square. All right, maximum pressure on c4. 3 attackers, 2 defenders. If you try to capture away now, it's not a good time for that. In the game, we have king to f3. What's the issue with capturing away on c4 here? Let's find out. How would this work? In the end, there's rook takes b2 check. This is a big deal because now the rook has time to drop back and defend this pawn should there be some pressure on it. If we look at a different position, let's say after king f3, if black, let's say, goes with f5, now we can capture away. What's the difference? Well, rook takes on b2. Rook takes on b2 is not with check. White is now on move and can continually attack the pawn, not just in any way, not along a file, because it could be defended, but it can continually attack the pawn along a rank, and the rook is never able to defend. a6, rook c6, a5, rook c5. And eventually this guy is won, this guy goes here, and the pawn races up to at least a6, and white goes from there. Good luck to black trying to hold that. Okay, the difference between king on e2 and f3 was highlighted. A difference. c3 in the game, black's giving away a pawn. Yeah, it's not considered best, the c3 move. There is an interesting defense, rook to c5, which, if white goes in for this sequence now, it's not entirely the same because 2 rooks are still on board, and this rook has some nice lateral movement. Can continually harass the king with checks, something like this, and if you try to go here, well, you're going to the square you don't want to go there. Rook takes b2 check, and if you block with the rook, what's happening there? Chop, chop. Rook takes b2 is now threatening rook takes f2. And if you take with the pawn, there's rook takes b2 threatening rook b3 check, winning the a pawn. So what am I getting at? This little rook lift on move 25 is a nice resource, I believe, with these 5th rank checks in mind. In this game, we have c3. Pawn is given away, and after the game, Carlsen said he was expecting Caruana to follow up with knight to c4, trying to get the knights off and play a rook-specific endgame. Caruana does not go for that. Instead, it's rook to c5, and now this pawn gets rolling a little bit, so the white rooks now have some air, some square to work with, c3. The rook right now is blockader. The white king on f3 returns to assist in the defense of c4, and some regrouping here. This last move is paving the way for knight to b3, trying to remove the defender so this pawn can run. The move played here was rook to c6. Considered better is king e7. That's a tough move to play, undoing your earlier king move. I believe this is to keep open the option of rook to d8, threatening to move the knight with the discovery. In this game, a preemptive move, rook to c6, I guess anticipating knight to d3, maybe even rook to b3, the rook getting harassed. So after this move, we have a nice photo to share with you, courtesy of Lennart Otis. I believe this is the moment This picture was captured. Carlsen on move before he plays his 31st move. Appears confident. Caruana, he is locked in. And yeah, these two are both super resourceful and resilient. I mean, their last 19 classical games have all been drawn. So, and it only ever takes one slip and you can squander an advantage. So they are both locked in to this game. Okay. Play follows with c5. And the knight now goes in reverse. So this is where white is now really starting to gain something. Just in general, right? What has just happened? White moved forward and generated a threat, and black reacted by running in reverse. Rarely is this good for the player who's running in reverse. If black tries to move forward, there are issues with that. Yeah, you're generating a threat, but now you have pins to get out of. So, okay. White keeps the pressure on. Black's going backwards. White's regrouping, threatening now a fork. So that's sidestepped. Rook a6, knight e5 check, king e2. Some shifty king moves here. He's on f3, e2, d3, back to e2. What's the point of going to e2 here? Well, it anticipates f6. The knight now can fall back to a cozy square. He would remain in that sweet spot of the board, key 16 squares. And it also keeps open the option to maybe transfer rook to the d file and potentially coordinate with the knight on d7. I think many players in this position may be really tempted to say, well, I have that passed pawn on c5, and they say passed pawns must be pushed, but there's, I believe, a reason to not play c6 straight away. I mean, for one, it'll be stopped cold with knight to c7, but I think the thing here is that when you play c6, black no longer has to worry about maybe a knight jump into c6. That can be pretty dangerous for sure. So that legal move is kept open to white by not simply pushing a passed pawn. All right. King e2 in this case. Rook c2, safeguarding the king. A blend of repositioning, preventative moves, anticipating what it is black maybe trying to do to influence white's position. Some offense and defense going on here. Rook c8, rook b3, defense of the 7th rank for black. Rook c4. Tiny improvements here. Rook c5, knight d3, and e5. This is kind of a lashing out type move. I believe right around this stage, Caruana had around 11 minutes. Yeah, this is going to result in the loss of a pawn. e5, we're going to have knight takes e, and then black gets the c pawn. White gets active on the 7th rank. Eventually, white wins a pawn. So why does black go for a move such as e5? Is it out of frustration? I don't believe that's the case. I believe it has more to do with, if I simply take a sit and wait approach, that's rarely a good idea. White is able to make tiny improvements still to his position. Black has, I believe, basically exhausted, if you look at the pieces, the knights and the rooks, What can they do that will really, what improvements are there left for those pieces? Can maybe move a pawn over here, but eventually what's going to happen is that this material plus that white has, there are ways to improve. We could see it with maybe a4, rook b5. We could also see it in the form of f3, e4. That's maybe the clearest one to see how white is making progress. What's happening with f3 and e4 if black simply tries to sit and wait? The knight is driven back. And also a new square is produced for the white king. The king can start to improve. So easy ways for white to improve, not so much for black. All right. We have e5. Exchanges on board. Rook versus knight. Or excuse me, a rook and knight versus rook and knight. Check on board. King e6. If instead of king e6, if rook f7, or rook c7, excuse me, we could have the rook exchange followed up with knight c6. And white wins the a pawn, a second pawn, and that would not just be any pawn. White would then have an outside passed pawn, a passed rook pawn. And a passed rook pawn is a nightmare to a knight. It's really inconvenienced having to go to the edge to have to stop that passer. Okay, so there is no rook c7. Also, knight c7, you could take on a7. Rook takes knight, rook takes knight. White, yet again, still up 2 pawns. At the end of the day, what do we have? King e6. Knight takes on f7. Rook a5. And the best move here, in the computer's eyes, is knight takes h6. Is that a good decision? Practically speaking, no. To take on h6 and allow this pawn to be captured is completely unnecessary. This would not be showing, I'd say, clean technique. Why is that? Well, we're now all of a sudden entering what could very well turn out to be a foot race, a time-sensitive position. What am I talking about? Well, at this point, we have these guys as passers. Who's going to win the race? h4, a5, h5, a4. This is all completely unnecessary. It is completely appropriate at this stage to simply address the threat that black has, namely rook takes a3. Defend, consolidate, regroup, and then slowly make progress with the extra material you have. It is a 4 versus 2 majority for white. A completely healthy 4 versus unhealthy 2 majority for white on the king side. Okay. Technique. Knight d8 check so that the rook doesn't have to watch over the knight anymore. King d6, rook b3. Simple defense. The last thing white needs to do is get this clown that's on the edge back in the ball game. There was a threat for a fork threat here, knight b7. So that's sidestepped. Rook f7 or knight f7. Now maybe that pawn will be picked up if the king goes to e6. The knight's either going to get h6 or come back in the ball game. Back in the ball game, perfectly central. Improve the king. And from here, after knight to f4, that's the final move of the game. Black resigns. White is ready to simplify the position further. If knight takes knight, you could take with the pawn, but the idea here is to hit black with the check, recapture with the rook, and yeah, you're up two pawns, and that's just too much. What else can be tried by black? Maybe black wants to duck this knight exchange, knight f6. And there's rook b4 check, knight d3 check, and this is now, count it, a third pawn for white. So no good solution here at this stage. Again, Caruana throws in the towel. So, yeah, these two, always interesting to see them go at it. We still have the candidates tournament that was cut off midway, so we do not yet know who that challenger will be for Carlsen. It could very well turn out to be Caruana. We'll see when that time comes. As usual, I will look forward to covering the World Chess Championship match. If we have a look at the tail of the tape on this one, see how accurate these guys are. Here we go. Yeah, a nice advantage for Carlsen right around this point. After rook to c6, there was some jump there, and it just grew from that point. You could see that even though Caruana lost, still the quality of play, right? Average centipawn loss for Carlsen 17 to Caruana's 20. That's still very, very high level. I don't know. It's to be expected with these two. They're awesome. World's best. Top two. Anyhow, as usual, feel free to leave any feedback to this video in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed it and maybe took a thing or two away. That's all for now. Take care. Bye.